Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Jeff Greason. Jeff is Chief Technologist and co founder of Electric Sky and chairman of the Tau Zero Foundation. Jeff, welcome to the Future of Space.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you're my first guest as I just came back from the Arctic after being there for 2 months or so. I've been away for that long, and now I get to welcome my comeback with you. So I'm super stoked.
Well, I hope you had an exciting time. You lead a more exciting life on the Earth than I do. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Got to see some polar bears and some whales, but now that I'm back and getting back to the future space, so super excited. Jeff, before we continue with the work that you're working on right now, could you share with us 3 words that capture the essence of space for you?
It's hard to pick just 3, but if I had to pick just 3, I would say the everlasting frontier.
Wonderful.
It's the only frontier we know of that once we get there, we're not going to run out of it.
Yes, quite indeed. I mean, it is endless. Of once we make that step, then it's just going to be that first step is going to be really hard. But once we have it, then it's going to be sky. Well, the universe is the limit, but right.
Yes.
Now, there's a science story of going to space. It's a technology story of going to space. You've been involved in a lot of technology, but from your perspective, what is the human story of going to space?
Well, in some ways, I view space as getting back to the normal human story. I mean, the human story for the last 100,000 years, at least, has been we discover new environments that we are not adapted to by evolution, and we invent new technologies and new social structures that allow us to thrive in that environment. And then we move on to the next environment. People today, I think, have lost the perspective a little bit of how much that has been the human story, because we've had these technologies now like fire and clothing and pottery and seagoing canoes and things like that for so many thousands of years. People almost regard them as part of the environment. They don't think of them as the human inventions that they are. But those were all invented because we were living in new places that we couldn't live in without the invention of those technologies. It's only been on the order of a century or so since the closing of the last frontiers on Earth, where you could just go to a piece of land that nobody owned yet and make your living there. And the generations that are growing up now, regard this closed, only one Earth. We can't get anything new. You can't go anywhere new as normal. But it's historically extremely abnormal. And so the human story to me of going to space is recreating the environment in which human beings can do what has made us such a successful species. Go to new environments and develop the technologies and the new ways of putting human organizations and human social structures together that allow us to thrive there. And it's more difficult now, in absolute terms, of course, but as I've said before, you've probably heard me say, compared to the level of technology we have today, going to live on the moon or going to live on Mars is probably less daunting than getting to Australia and learning to live in Australia was to the human pioneers 60 or 70,000 years ago who did that, with a level of technology so low that, all they had was rocks and maybe twine. So that was a very challenging environment for them. We now face challenges that are just as challenging to us today. And that's what excites me about it so much, is that it is challenging. If it were easy, what would be the thrill of tackling the problem?
It is. I mean, it's such a new era because you were just talking about going to Australia, back in those days, the human cost of exploration back in those days, because we didn't have the capacity. I mean, our only way to collect knowledge was for us to go to places. So there was a human cost of exploration, because if we needed to know something, then we had to physically go over there, and then there was the challenges, and we had to. I mean, how many people died and just by trying to cross Antarctica or Greenland or these things. Now we have a helicopter and rovers on Mars. We have satellites that are collecting data. So when we do go to places, we're not going blind and not knowing what's happening. The first time that we will set foot on Mars, it will be, we know what's going on, we know what's happening. Great, there are challenges, but there's not this, we have to figure it out. In the process, there's going to be a lot of costs for humans. So it's an absolute new era. And I mean, it is, I've written how evolution is about to go from single planet to multi-planet, in the same way that it went from single cell to multi-cell. And when it went from single cell to multi-cell, it led to the Cambrian explosion. Like, it just, the world when incredible with all these new opportunities. And that is the scale of evolution. The quantum leap of evolution that we're about to witness is of a magnitude that I think it's really hard for us to understand, because that what is needed to, just like what you said, what is needed for that next step, once we make that step, there's just going to be like an avalanche. Like, you push the barrel off the mountain, and it's just going to go down. And I think that it's going to be amazing to see what is in front of us. I mean, I know that you're excited, but how excited are you about the next 100, 200 years?
I don't know. I'm excited and terrified in equal measure, because the magnitude of the opportunity is so great. And, yet right now we only have the one Earth. We only have the one planetary civilization. There's a lot riding on us rising to that challenge in time. Before accident or error or natural or artificial catastrophe might overtake us. Not because we're running away from something. I really dislike, the theme that people think about space sometimes in that way, but because, we are facing a choice of futures in which either we are in one planet and we are prone to catastrophe or single points of failure or pandemic or, change of energy sources or war or whatever it might be, or one in where, sure, would still be bad things, but you wouldn't be risking the entire biosphere or the entirety of human civilization. It would be, if one might think of it as a local problem. And if there were to be a civilizational collapse, and a loss of technology, the other outposts of human civilization would retain that technology, and it would be a passing problem. Let me just go on a little bit longer. I mean, I'm 55, right? In my lifetime, I have seen how much more inward looking and how much more constrained people think about the possibilities of what the future can be. That's not a good thing. That's not healthy, right? You want every generation coming up to think, they have unlimited possibilities in front of them, that they can try new things, that they can dare to dream, and maybe those dreams can be made reality. And it's so frustrating to me to watch a generation growing up that way, thinking only about managing the decline, when we are on the threshold of opening up possibilities that there is no end to. And in evolutionary terms, right, then people think about this as a issue of machines, but it's not. Humans are part of a biosphere. We can't go to live on other planets without bringing the Earth along with us, and crops and bacteria and, probably some animals. The whole biosphere has to come along with the package. So we are Earth's vector for spreading the biosphere out into the rest of the universe. We better not fail to that challenge.
It's I've written a little bit about how, and not and you and I we've talked about, and I don't want to give life a personality per se, but from the perspective of life, it's been growing in complexity for billions of years, ultimately, so that it can continue to grow and to reach new places. Otherwise, it would be quite a waste of time and energy and effort if it would be to be limited on the tiny planet into this vast universe. So, from a pure perspective of expansion, we're about to give it the biggest boost so that it can go and continue reaching to new places. So totally agree with you that the human is that vector. And I think that what has made the human species successful is that we've taken the nature in its raw form and we've gone the extra mile. So the clothes that you have and I have, we were not born with them. We created those. The roof over our heads, we didn't have a roof over our heads when we were, and then we were born into one specific locations, and then we move so that we can assure our survival. So if there's a drought there or all these limitations that were given to us by nature, we take it and we figure out a way forward. And again, it's understandable from the public perspective that the scale of that next leap is massive, but it's nothing different than what we've been doing, crossing an ocean, going over the mountain. And one of the things that I find that I think that we forget is the challenges are not just separated from our capacity to manage them. Also, when we're young and we're baby, going over the hill is, it's as much as we can do. And then if you do fall from the hill, well, you just kind of roll down, and then there's not a big issue. As you get older, you start to climb up higher and higher, more difficult, but also your capacity to manage these challenges also increases. And obviously, if you do fall off the mountain when you're going in Everest, then you die. But your skills have increased, parallel to them. So when we say, yes, we have a lot of challenges, we have a lot of technologies that can go, both ways. But at the same time, there's a tremendous amount of work that is done into making sure that we move, mindfully I mean, look at all the efforts into space, trying to go into space with, respecting the environment. We have other companies like Privateer that already are mindful about the amount of junk or garbage in the ocean, in space. So there are challenges, a lot of them, but we have a desire to make the right choices. Would you agree with that?
The long pause is because, I find people have a very narrow time horizon when they think about what the right choices are. Like we look back now on some of the industrial era of a century ago and think, oh my gosh, they were so dirty. They left such a mess. Okay, but the luxury and the technology and the standard of living that we have today that enables us to have so much surplus wealth that we can clean up that mess came from that mess. So it's very easy for people to look at other historical eras and think themselves morally superior because they're living under different constraints today, so they would make different choices today. But the thing I get from the study of history is how human nature has not changed. We are still very much the same kind of creatures we always have been. And if we think we'd make different choices today, that's because we've changed our circumstances. So do I believe we have the ability to overcome the challenges that are necessary to move human civilization and the human economy into space? Absolutely, I do. I just don't have the hubris to say that I know what the right choices are and that we will or won't make them. What I think will happen is we'll make a lot of choices. We'll make a lot of mistakes. A lot of people will die in the process. Guess what? This too is part of the human story. And how many of those people will die if they don't go to space? 100%. We all die from something. So it's a question of, we will never know how many Polynesian sailing vessels exploring out when they didn't even know if there was an island out there didn't make it home. We'll never know how many people tried to paddle across oceans they could barely see across to make it to the Australasian landmass and didn't make it. A lot, probably. One of the things I see about people thinking about what the human future will be in space is it's a blank canvas that they project their own biases and prejudices on. They think the future society and they write science fiction about the future society, and it looks just like the society that they live in with a few changes. The variety of human society history is very, very large. The way that Polynesian societies or Arctic Thule or Eskimo societies, and Western post-literate societies have organized themselves are all very, very different. The thing that excites me about space is it's so vast and the distances between are so large, and there's the isolation of vacuum between any two settlements that we can regain the diversity of human experience and the diversity of human social systems. People can again try new things, new forms of social organization, new technologies, whatever that may be. And if history is any guide, the overwhelming majority of those experiments will fail. Look at the American West in the 1800s. Look at how many people went off to form utopian communes to express their idea of what a human society should be like. When you try to design human societies, you mostly don't work because human societies evolve slowly. But sometimes you try things and you get a radical new idea like self-government that propagates and spreads because it turns out to be a useful idea. If we don't have the freedom to try bad ideas, we don't have the freedom to try good ideas either, because we don't know up front which ideas are good ideas and bad ideas. So I'm not daunted by the prospect of failure. In some ways, if we don't set up the conditions where failure is allowed, success is also not allowed. And it's a big moon. The moon, our nearest target, has a landmass the size of Africa. And travel between places on the moon on the surface is no easier than it was for traveling in pre-industrial societies between places in Africa. And Africa is the most genetically and socially diverse place on the planet because it's the birthplace of the human species. So we have no idea what will evolve up there. And I try to not get into the trap of designing it or projecting what I think it's going to be like, because if it were just the way I wanted it, that would still be not the right answer. The right answer is that it be the way everybody wants it, and they can all try their things, and the 99% of ideas that are turned out to be stupid ideas will be revealed to be stupid ideas.
The challenge in evolution or even learning is there's no difference at the beginning between a mistake and innovation. The path to an innovation and mistake is exactly the same one. The only difference is the hindsight. One worked and then the other one didn't work. And then to make it even more complicated, there's no formula that says you need to fail 3 times to get it right, or you need to fail. Often you're going to have 2 teams that do exactly the same thing to the letter. And then one is going to work and then the other one is not going to work. And then, and the successful ones say, well, this is what we did. And that is the mistake in judging the past. No one in the past did things specifically to make mistakes or to do bad things. Even when it comes to, to the earth, our parents or even the forebears, no one woke up in the morning saying, oh, we're going to do the worst thing possible for the future, for the planet. Even when plastic came out, it was held as the solution for a lot of things. And if we're to judge the past, then we have to accept that we will be judged by the future in that same simpleness of where we are today. And we have to understand that the beauty of our species is being resilient. And yes, we break things, but then we figure out how to fix them. And that is, I think, what makes us successful and where we are today, is because we're constantly reassessing and trying to fix things as we find those limitations, those boundaries. And obviously and I think that that is how nature is designed. Nature, every organism is basically driven to do two things. They conquer their environment until they reach their limit, and they have to figure out how to move forward. Whether it's a fungi or a plant, they will expand until they reach the boundaries, and then they have to figure out. It's like, look at any, fish, big fish or whales. They will go and find a ball of bait fish, and then it will eat everything that there is. And then they go, okay, so where's next? What we have to do? And the human species has just been successful in stepping up and stepping up and stepping up. And now we've reached.
I mean, people think of us as, I think wrongly, as very short-sighted. But, compared to an animal, we've got a long time horizon. I mean, here you and I are talking about what might we do to ensure the survival of the human civilization and the human species for tens of thousands of years into the future. And you can say most people don't think that long, and you'd be right. But, still most people are thinking about what they're doing next year or 5 years from now, and animals don't think that way. Are we infinitely farsighted and infinitely wise? Of course not. But let's not sell ourselves short. We've been successful enough to become the most successful species on the planet. That probably wasn't a complete accident. And there's no reason to think that this is the last planet that we're going to be successful on.
I mean, life is, it's this constant juggling between tension and, and flexibility. You don't want too much tension because otherwise you break, but then you don't want too much, flexibility because now you can't move forward. It's like having a tree. You want to be able to swing in the, in the wind a little bit, but then you need to have enough tension so that you can go up. There's one thing that.
Well, I think of it in terms very much like species of diversity. Even for species, the right answer is not. There's no such thing as the right answer. There's only the right answer for right now. Conditions are not static. They're always changing. We need a diversity of places that human civilization has reached. We need a diversity of technologies that are suitable for those places. We need a diversity of social structures that are evolved to deal with those places. And over time, conditions will continue to change in ways that we can't expect. And if we have that diversity, some of them will be more successful in the face of changing circumstances, and others will become less successful. It doesn't matter which is which, as long as you have the diversity. If you have one culture, one species, one genetic code, one way of organizing social structures, you lack resiliency. You're very brittle, and no matter how successful you may be for the conditions of today, you might not be successful for the conditions of tomorrow.
Diversity is a strategy for life to make sure that it moves forward. And, when we look at diversity in our world, we don't necessarily have to put the moral aspect to it, but just plainly as a necessity for surviving and for the future. It's a dynamic ecosystem that assures that there's this continual mix of innovation. And I have this theory that why life really exists on Earth is not necessarily because or only you have the ingredients for life, is because these ingredients are constantly being churned and mixed and turned. You have the rhythm of the moons, the seasons, the light and day. So it's like making bread, right? You have flour and then you have water, but even if you have the ingredients on the counter, nothing is going to happen independently how much you want to think about it. Why? How do you make bread? Is because you start to interact and you mix all those things. And there's a part of me that is, we're about to be 8 billion on the planet, and you and I, we can agree that there's not 8 billion working brains on the planet, but there's a lot of brain working trying to find solutions. And just the thought that there's a future where we might have 14 billion, 16 billion brains, the capacity to figure out new problems, solve new problems. It's like we're getting the scale of computing and capacity to solve issues is just going to be more exciting, right?
I mean, the if you contemplate expansion into free space habitats, so you're not just limited to planetary surfaces, and you look at the energy and material resources of the solar system, my back of the envelope calculation is that the carrying capacity of the solar system is about 1 trillion people. You know, so let's see, we get one scientist of the caliber of Einstein every 30 or 50 years now. So we might get some scientists on the caliber of Einstein, every month. There are advantages to scale, and as a quick side note, I mean, one of the great underreported stories of the last about 50 years is that what we used to think of as absolute poverty is very nearly been eliminated from the planet, barring circumstances like civil war. Um, how did that happen? And how that happened is large chunks of the globe that were not previously participants in the global economy, they were just participating in their own local economy, have become integrated into the global economy through the global access to trade. So we probably have effectively tripled or quadrupled the number of brains that are contributing to what we do on planet Earth in just the last 50 years, not because of just a growth in the human population, but the growth of the fraction of that population that's really participating in the world economy. So there's a fairly visible sign. You look at how dramatically our living standards have raised in the last 50 years. It's again something that, I'm older. I can get some sense of that from my own lifetime. But the technologies we have today were just unthinkable 50 years ago. And we don't only use those technologies for quote unquote frivolous purposes. We introduce things like pollution control devices. When I was a kid, we used to go down to Disneyland. I'd walk in the front gate at Disneyland. You couldn't see Cinderella's castle through the smog. That's only about 50 years. So, I'm very bullish about what we can achieve, but I'm not Pollyannish about it. The future is not given to us on a plate. If we want to live in the future where we can continue to grow, continue to expand, continue to develop, and to get the new niches into which this diversification can take place, we better go work for it.
Yeah, I think we have to make sure that people understand this optimism that we have is not naive. It's not being naive and dismissing the challenges that we have. It's more acknowledging, if we look at the history and past, yes, history or the path of an entrepreneur, of an artist, if from a holistic, macro perspective, it tends to, it looks like going up, but the closer that you get, it's just this jagged reality where, creation, destruction, but ultimately the curve is going up. And when I was traveling in the Arctic in the last 2 months, we were visiting some of the ruins from the Norse society 700 years ago, who disappeared. And moving forward in our future, there will be group of societies that are disappearing. But I was standing in the remaining of a church. It was built in stone, realizing that all the other buildings have disappeared except for the church. We're the only species who build standing buildings just to show our faith and believe in something, not to survive, but just to show, just to express what we believe in. But just trying to imagine these people 700 years ago, they would have no understanding of the simple technology that we have today. Whether it's the phone or the walkie-talkie or just this cruise ship that was outside their settlements. And we have to make the same mental exercise of the future in 700 years from now is so far away from our realm of understanding that it's useless to try to figure out how it will be. The only thing that we can visualize is our capacity to adapt it, to make the most of the best of it, because this is what we do. This is what we did 700 years ago. This is what we do today. And this is what we will do in 700 years from now. Do you agree?
I do. It's impossible. You project the rate of technological improvement forward even another 300 years. You're basically off the edge of the map. All you can do is, right there, here be dragons, and throw up your hands, because we have no idea. I think that's partly why people, are, in some sense, a lot of people are more comfortable with the doom and gloom idea that they're going to live in some kind of collapsed or post-apocalyptic society, because they can get their head around that. They can visualize what that would be like. You look at the other end of the spectrum. The closest I can come is to quote from the old prefix to the Whole Earth catalog: "We are as gods and might as well get good at it." Our powers, if our powers continue to grow, we're gonna have a lot of responsibility for dealing with those. But what we don't know, but there are some things we can make guesses about, and the things that we can make guesses about, again, I just leave me shaking my head when people ask, well, why are we bothering with space? It's just like, oh my God, are you even thinking about what you're asking? Because people say, well, we have problems here on Earth. Well, what problems? What are these problems that we have? Well, we're concerned about our environmental footprint. We're concerned that we're not recycling the resources that we use fast enough. We're concerned that we don't have sustainable sources of energy. Okay. What are the number 1 and 2 challenges that you face looking at any settlement of human beings off the Earth? Okay. Number 1, you need a source of local energy, because we don't have fossil fuels anywhere else, or an atmosphere to burn them with. So you have to get your energy from natural sources, and you have to learn how to collect them and process them efficiently. What's the number 2 thing you got to have? You got to bring an ecosystem with you. You don't have local fields to hunt and fish. You have to have your own closed loop life support system. You have to learn to close it as quickly as you can, as well as you can, as efficiently as you can, in an economically practical way. On the Earth, those are luxuries. In space, those are necessities. It is much easier to get people to focus on solving the problems they have to solve than just the problems that would be nice if they solved. We cannot successfully go to space without solving the same problems that people worry about that we're not solving on the Earth. So why would you ever think to yourself, oh, maybe we shouldn't put so much emphasis on going to space? Not that we're putting any degree of emphasis on it. I mean, the expenditures that we put into going into space are negligible compared to other things that we spend money on. We probably spend more money printing forms at the Pentagon than we spend on NASA. Whatever that money is, and I'm not saying that money is all well spent. Certainly you can find, waste and abuse and things that you wish were done more wisely. Welcome to the world of human endeavor. But to question the usefulness of the enterprise just leaves me slack-jawed, because the central problems that we're solving, again, are the same problems that people worry about here. The problem is learning how to live with less and less consumption of resources, and how to access the energy harvest it from available natural means. I can't imagine what better endeavor we could be tackling than to go off and solve these problems.
And that angle is often what I go back to. Also, the incentives to do the right thing on Earth often are not there because of the abundance of resources. It's easier to do the wrong thing than to do the good thing. But in space, the incentives are flipped. It's really you cannot afford to be wasteful. That atom that transform process atom of carbon that you have with you, you have to figure out how to reuse it over and over and over again. The idea of opening the door and just sending away your trash, that would be the most ridiculous thing to do, because you cannot just, oh, let's swim by a different planet and just resupply. You have to be self-sustainable. And it reminds me of back in the 1900s when you had Tesla, the Wright brothers, and Edison, and all trying to do things that were so kind of not appropriate for their time, for the issues of those times, right? There were some diseases that were happening. There were some social challenges, and they faced the same kind of backlash of people saying, why wasting time trying to take, the sky? Why spend energy? Why are you trying to power the world when we have these realities to deal with?
Yeah. What use is an electric light when people are starving? Answer: it's going to power
Exactly.
a refrigerator and people won't be starving anymore. But we can't know that until after we get there.
Absolutely. But the world that they created took care of those problems from an indirect way. And that's the thing that, for me, I find it's mind-boggling that there's not a general understanding that solutions are not just this one way, really single. It's a multitude of different approaches. Again, we're talking about being resilient. It's trying to figure out how we can come up at it from different angles. And obviously the technology is going to be, spreading its way. But it's having, this is one of the challenges I've always had with the environmental world and the nature world, is how they think of the world in a static perspective. They see it in a really linear and 1 + 1 = 2. In nature, like, it's a point in the past that you can go back and say, oh, everything was in perfect harmony back then. The world is constantly at the dynamic, all these little pieces always working, and whatever is great today might not be great tomorrow. And we have to figure out how to juggle a way forward. And space, the reality that space is going to bring to the planet is really not at the expense. It's like saying that when your children leave your house, leave the family house, it's at the expense of the parents. It's not at the expense of the parents. The reasons why family wealth get bigger and bigger is because all the children keep leaving the nest and developing their own lives and creating their own families, and then elevates the family wealth and the stability. That is the reality of what's going to happen when we go to space. It's just going to keep making our stability, stronger. That's
Well, and even in less lofty terms, right? If you have outposts of human civilization that are somewhere other than the Earth, right? Their first challenge, as has been true for human settlements throughout prehistory, is they got to get to subsistence farming or the equivalent thereof. You have to get to the point where they can stay alive. But once they get to that point and they start generating economic surplus, which they have to do in order to be able to grow and so they can have kids and build habitats for those kids and all that stuff, we now can trade. And trade always benefits both parties. Otherwise, you don't do it. It's a mutual voluntary exchange. So the once you start having human beings able to keep themselves alive someplace other than the Earth, the effects on the cost of goods and services in space is dramatic. Even something, the first two things you could probably get off the lunar surface are oxygen and dirt, regolith. Okay, well, those are both useful. Right? Oxygen is what we use for rocket propellant, and regolith is good radiation shielding. And regolith can be processed into metals for making stuff out of. So and just by virtue of the fact that those things are not on the Earth, and they're on a body with much lower gravity than the Earth, it's much easier to get them off of than the Earth. Just that first outpost probably makes an order of magnitude change in how easy it would be to do anything else that you want to do in space. And then you start thinking about, okay, now there are human beings on Mars. Well, it's probably a lot easier to put greenhouses up on Mars than it is, because there's just enough atmosphere to be helpful. Maybe they become the food export surplus for people who are living in the space environment, and they trade all with each other. So it's you can think about it both in analogistic terms, kind of it's like being evolution, but you can also think about it in economic terms or technological terms. But the key again is it's the first step that's hard. And the reason why the first step is hard is the first human settlement that's anywhere other than the Earth, wherever it might be, has to tackle all the problems simultaneously. And once the first one is up, as I mentioned, that makes the second one at least 10 times easier. But the first one's hard. So the first one probably will not be done purely on a for-profit basis, because it isn't going to make a profit. It's going to take either philanthropic or public investment or both.
Everyone exists today because someone somewhere in the past left their nest and went and explored. And then there's an entire generation and future in the future and that is coming that will exist because of that next expansion. And there's a place in the back of my mind. I cannot rob that future to those generations. In the same way that I'm grateful for all the people before me who decided to either, get on a boat or go over the mountain or decide to risk, everything for the promise of a future. Now, Jeff, we could go on for being philosophical for a long time, but I
I
want to
think
also
2 hours easy, but
But do you want to share with us a little bit of what you're working on with Electric Sky and the Tau Zero Foundation?
yeah. As you might expect, since I care about this stuff so much, this is what gets me up in the morning, is what can I do to shorten the schedule to us getting off this planet. So my day job, Electric Sky, explaining that takes a short side trip into the economics of space transportation. With chemical rockets, the investment in the plant and equipment that it takes to be in the chemical rocket launch business is fairly large. It's a multi-billion-dollar investment. So the reason why space is expensive right now is we don't fly to space very often. So that large investment is divided by not very many flights, which is what makes it expensive. It's not because of something intrinsic like the amount of propellant you burn or something like that, or the amount of energy that it takes. A company like SpaceX or United Launch Alliance takes about $1 billion a year to keep the doors open. If you launch 50 times, those launches better cost more than $20 million each, otherwise you're losing money. And that's before you add in the fact that you actually are expending some stuff and it does cost something. So there's been a pretty substantial reduction in the price of launch over the last 5 or 10 years, largely because of SpaceX entering the market and the volume of traffic going up. And SpaceX is making, and other companies are making large bets right now that if they build larger, more reusable systems that can fly more often, that there'll be enough traffic to keep them flying more often, and the price will come down. And if that can all work if the traffic shows up. I asked myself the question of, what if the traffic doesn't show up? What if there's not 10 or 100 times the space launch traffic that's ready to fly? The only way to make space cheap in that case is to dramatically reduce the dollars per year it takes to keep a space launch company in the space launch business. So I was approached by my co-founder back in 2015 or 2016, saying, okay, is there some way to go to space that is also useful for high-speed point-to-point flight on the Earth? Because that's a much larger market. And if you could make your bread and butter money flying people around the Earth, and space launch was something you did on alternate Wednesdays, you wouldn't need a lot of space launch traffic to keep it cheap. And the only way I could find in principle to do that is if you did not have to carry the energy on board the vehicle anymore. Right? What makes it expensive to go fast is that you have a lot of energy that you're turning into kinetic energy of the vehicle. And if you carry it all with you, you need a very, very big vehicle to hold all that propellant. And that's what makes these things big and expensive to fly, is that you need big things, need big companies to build them. So I said, well, if we could beam up the power from the ground and receive it on the vehicle would get dramatically smaller and lighter and cheaper. And it would be so cheap to operate that we could afford to use it for point-to-point flight on the surface of the Earth. In other words, electric aviation. But there's no way to do that. So we spent the last 6 years inventing a way to do that. To do the beaming up from the ground. Takes several inventions simultaneously, only some of which we have demonstrated, the others we are working on. We just did our first, we haven't put out the press release yet, but it's not a secret. We just did our first across the laboratory demonstration of the power beaming technology as a work we're doing with DARPA. And we're pursuing other contracts to try to, or sources of investment to try to demonstrate the other technologies. It's a huge leap. I mean, it's Wright Brothers level revolutionary technology, because like the Wright Brothers, we have to make simultaneous breakthroughs in like 4 areas to put together into a complete vehicle system. So I do not want to leave the impression that we view this as a trivial or solved problem. But we see an avenue of attack for doing all of these things. And one of the neat things that would come out of it would be you could do high-speed flight cheaper than you can do low-speed subsonic flight with something like a 787. And you will be electric powered. So you could power the beam from the ground with whatever source of electric power you found convenient at that time. So if for example, we were to invest in the necessary nuclear plants that it takes to power our civilization, you could power it with nuclear. Don't try doing that, putting a nuclear power source on board the airplane. It will not work. Too heavy. Or the same thing with wind and solar and batteries and pumped hydro storage. There's a lot of sources of energy we have, but only fossil fuels are highly portable right now. So if we get to the point where we can transmit the electricity up from the ground, it makes all the other forms of energy equally portable. And then, of course, it would make a space launch vehicle that you could fit into a garage, because you wouldn't need all of the size to hold all that propellant and do all that smoke and fire. I like rockets too. They look fun. They're fun to be around. They're fun to work on, and they make an impressive picture. But I like dirigibles too, but they're a technology of a previous time, and I hope the day might come when we'll view chemical rockets as the space transportation technology of a previous time. So that's electric sky.
Nice. Well, I mean, Leonardo da Vinci was like trying to figure out how to fly, and then it took, the Wright brothers many, many, many years later, and Tesla actually tried to figure out how to beam energy because he believed that you could do that. And there will be a future. Maybe it's going to be, I'm sure it's going to be through Electric Sky and your team, but I believe it's going to happen. So you got my big high five for that, Jeff.
By the way, short fun story before we go on. People look at Tesla and power beaming. That name comes up all the time because, they like, well, Tesla tried to do that. And like, okay, the way Tesla was trying to do that, people don't always know this, was using the Earth and the ionosphere of the Earth as a waveguide to transmit the power. And Tesla didn't and couldn't know, because nobody measured it yet, that the conductivity of the ionosphere is not high enough to do that. So he didn't fail because he was stupid. He didn't fail because what he was trying to do was impossible. He failed because the conditions of the Earth were not known in enough detail to know whether that method could or couldn't work. So the fact that we know a lot more about what we're facing now, the fact that he couldn't make it doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be done.
And it's the same thing for every innovation, whether the age of exploration, when they didn't, they were not successful in the circumnavigation of the Earth, it's not because it wasn't possible. It's because their capacity to solve the problems or to achieve it was just not possible. And in that reality, luck plays so much of a role in it. But
Yes.
wherever we are today, there's we go back to, there's a future where we will look back and we go, they were right next to the answer. Once you figure it out, then obviously it becomes obvious. And the metaphor that I often, I tell people in nature, when you try to swim out of, across the waves that are coming in, there are actually channels, and you could be in one channel trying to swim out as hard as you want, or trying to swim back as hard as you want, and you will never get anywhere. And the only thing that you need to do is just to move sideways a little bit, and then you will get a different channel that will take you into the direction that you want to. So our perspective of these challenges are not always exactly what we think they are. It's just that within the realities that we face and from the perspective that we see, we just don't see the full picture, not until we're on the other side, and then we'll look back, of course. But so, yeah.
Okay, so then Tau Zero, which is more fun than even to talk about, that's a nonprofit that I was asked to join as chairman of the board again in 2016. It's not a very big activity, but it's been a lot of fun because that kind of gave me the charter to go talk to all of the people working on advanced space propulsion around the world. It's not a very big community. There's maybe a few dozen people who are really working on it. And the charter was, can we find a way to solve the propulsion problems that would eventually scale to interstellar flight? Interstellar flight is awesomely hard. You have to get comfortable with numbers with a lot of zeros in them to get comfortable with thinking how to do that. And the energy requirements of rapid interstellar flight are so big that you can just give up on carrying the energy with you. It's just not possible by any method that we practically know about. Which means, to bring it all back to the kind of stuff we spent the first half hour talking about, you have to find ways of either transmitting energy so that you can beam it from the home solar system to the moving ship, or you have to find ways of harvesting energy from the environment that you're traveling through. And these are the same civilizational challenges. Collecting and transmitting and storing and operating on larger amounts of energy are exactly what we need to do to power the civilization of the Earth. So the problem is interesting in its own right, as well as because of its aspirational goals. And what's neat about Interstellar is it's such a daunting problem that talking about 10% improvements is just not interesting. You got to be talking about things that are 2, 3, 4, 5 orders of magnitude beyond what we can do right now. And that encourages you to think outside the box, because inside the box doesn't lead you where you want to go. If you'd asked me, 6 years ago, I would have said, all we're going to do is lay out the problem and study the problem, and that'll be our work. But somewhat to my shock, we've actually been making some progress. We and other people around the world. There's an annual or biannual conference called the Interstellar Research Group Conference, where we all get together and talk about this stuff. And there's been progress. I could actually lay out now, if you put, the breakthrough from this guy and the breakthrough from that group, and if all three of these got put together in the right way, I could map out now a notional system that needs immense research before we're ready to reduce it to practice. So not next Tuesday. But, whereas 10 years ago, I couldn't have laid out what I considered a practical starship, even in principle. Now I can. I could lay out, this is how we could actually do it. And one of the consequences of that is along the way, before you can do interstellar flight at all affordably, rapid flight to the outer solar system becomes much more practical. So some of these systems include things like, you could do a 6-month flight to Neptune orbit, and then 6 months later come back. So we could open up the outer solar system both for human missions, for human settlement. Titan is one of the most interesting bodies in the solar system for human settlement, in my opinion, more interesting than Mars. It's the only body in the solar system you can walk around on the surface without a pressure suit. But people haven't thought about it too much because it's so far away. Well, distance doesn't matter, time and cost do. And the outer solar system is full to the brim with icy bodies, that are full of volatiles. And, when you look at something like the moon, and we're hoping to be able to harvest millions of tons of remnant ice that's left over at the poles from the impact of icy bodies on the moon. Well, you can grab those icy bodies in the outer solar system and move them to wherever you want if you have the right transportation systems. So it's been pleasantly surprising that progress has been able to be made. I don't think it's widely known outside the very small community that progress is being made. But I mean, and it's frustrating as well because there's essentially no source of support. I mean, almost everybody working on this is working on this in their spare time from some kind of day job, or they're an academic, so they can afford to work on whatever they want to. There's not a lot in the way of contracts or sources of support or investment or things like that because it's too far out. It's a natural role for government investment because the implications for all of the other things we do in space of advancing our propulsion technology are so profound. And if wishes were horses, we'd all ride, but I'd love to see that source of support increased, because if we're making this much progress from a few dozen people working in their spare time, imagine what we could do if we actually had some funding.
Jeff, the future is challenging, but it's also and above all exciting.
Absolutely.
Where can people learn more about Electric Sky and the Tau Zero Foundation?
Unfortunately, there's very little more about Electric Sky to learn than what I have said. We're a private company and we haven't published a lot yet, because we have 4 miracles to produce and we've only so far reduced one of them to practice. But from when we are ready, we'll put out some press releases describing what we have done. On the advanced propulsion stuff, the easiest way to follow it is I give technical talks at the Interstellar Research Group Conference, IRG for short. And I also give a lot of other public talks over the years on space policy and that kind of thing. Most of them are on YouTube. So if you look up my name on YouTube, you'll be led to a variety of talks at varying levels of technical difficulty on either space policy, space philosophy, or space technology.
Well, we'll make sure all the links are in the description, and also the link to your LinkedIn profile, that people can connect to you if they want to. Jeff, it's always a pleasure. I look forward for our next face-to-face, and this time it will be with a real glass of wine. So I'm looking forward. I'm looking for our next conversation.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jeff.